Okay. So we have Lucille Patrichuk from CTSU. She's the Assistant Director for CTSU, and she's going to speak to us about recent changes due to the NCTN.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Lisa and SWOG for inviting the CTSU to come and talk about the recent changes with the NCTN. And we don't seem to be. Okay, there we go. Okay. So for the agenda today, it's a bit lengthy because the transition to the new NCTN has touched on many areas of the trial operations and our processes. So I will kind of highlight all of the changes and as they affect all these different areas. So the overall goal of the NCI's NCTN programs to conduct definitive randomized late-phase clinical treatment trials and advanced imaging trials across a broad range of disease and diverse patient populations. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about the development of the new NCTN program. A lot of that information is on the CTEP website as well as the CTSU website. So we want to concentrate more on how it has affected, the sites and how you enroll and care for your patients. So the NCTN was launched on March 3rd. It was a huge effort. We tried to minimize the impact on institutions and sites, so hopefully we didn't wreak total havoc for everyone. But the network now consists of 4 adult U.S. groups, 1 pediatric U.S. group, and 1 Canadian group. And as you know, some of the groups, the previous cooperative groups have merged. And so we are down to now 6 network groups. In addition, the network now entails also something called a Lead Academic Participating Site Grant. There are a number of these grants. I can't say for sure. I think there's in the vicinity of about 30 grants that were awarded to lead academic institutions that provide scientific leadership in the development and conduct of clinical trials, and as well as substantial accrual to clinical trials. And so those grants are funded by NCI, and depending on if you work at one of these institutions, that will affect where your funding comes from, and we'll talk more about that later. So this is the new network group structure. So as you can see, so let's see if I can get my mouse working. So now we do have the LAPS grants, as you can see here. And as part of the LAPS grants, the LAPS can have affiliates, main members, and integrated components. And they also, the affiliates can have sub-affiliates. Now, all of these institutions are actually listed on the LAPS grant, which means their funding will come out of the LAPS grant, and it will coming from NCI. In addition, you can have some institutions that are called, we are calling them aligned affiliates. So these are affiliates to the main LAPS institution, but they're not listed on the grant. So their funding will come from a network group, whoever was credited with their accruals. Okay, so that's sort of the difference in why there's sort of the orange boxes and now you have the blue boxes. And obviously, the aligned affiliate could have a sub-affiliate. Also, with this new group structure, we are capturing some Tier 3 sites, some of the smaller sites, sub-affiliates, where sometimes they weren't really captured before. So in addition, then there's the main members, which is pretty much the way it was in the previous cooperative group with their affiliates and sub-affiliates. And then, of course, there's the CCOPs and the CCOP components and the CCOP subcomponents. So this slide, I'm just going to summarize a bit. Basically, what it's saying is that if your institution is part of a LAPS component, so if it's part of a LAPS grant component, you'll participate that way across all of the group rosters. So if your site is a member of more than one group, basically you're participating as a LAPS component on whichever roster you're on. Okay, so you can't be part of a lapse on one group roster and then a main member or an affiliate on another group roster. Okay, so, and the same goes for CCOP. So if you're a CCOP on one group roster, you will participate as a CCOP on any of the other group rosters if you're also a member of another roster. As far as the adult, just at the network group, if you're a main member, you can be a main member on one roster and then be an affiliate on another roster. That is allowed. And as far as the pediatric network group, they really only have main members. So there have been changes to the crediting rules as well. The lead group rule no longer exists for U.S. sites. So U.S. sites may credit any participating network group to which the site and credited investigator are affiliated with, assuming that group is participating on the trial. Okay, so that's somewhat different. Canadian sites must credit the NCTN group that holds the CTA. The lead group rule does apply to the international sites. They must credit the lead protocol organization if they're a member of the lead organization. If not, they must receive approval from the credited group and before they can assign credit to them. So there are some changes with open with the NCTN. All NCTN trials are in open. So any active legacy trial that was active prior to March is in open, but of course there are a few exceptions. 2 of them are here. S0711 is not using open right now, and S1201 for step 2 is not using open, but that will be moved to open sometime in the near future. If you had open role previous to the NCTN transition and your site is still active within the NCTN, we did carry those roles over. And then the new component to open is open has a funding screen now where we are collecting information, funding information for the completion of tests and QOLs and such for funding. And I'll talk more about that later. So that is a new component within open. As far as open access, it pretty much remains the same for except for one slight change. Obviously, you need to CTEP IAM account, and I apologize, the second bullet is incorrect. It should be only an active roster status on a treatment. You can't be in follow-up to enroll patients. You have to be active, and you have to have the role of registrar. But this last bullet is new. The CTSU roster no longer controls access. So now you have to either be on the lead organization's roster or another participating organization's roster. Okay, so the CTSU roster no longer applies for access. RAVE, the same with RAVE. All new NCTN trials will utilize RAVE. Previous legacy trials that were active before the NCTN transition, if they were not using RAVE, they'll continue to use whatever data collection mechanism they were using. The RAVE roles also, if your institution is now still part of the NCTN, we did carry those RAVE roles over for you. RAVE access, pretty much same as open, CTEP IAM account. You can be in a follow-up status and maintain your RAVE role and have your RAVE access. So it's active or follow-up for RAVE, whereas for open, you have to be active. You have to have one of the 3 RAVE roles, and again, the CTSU does not control any access. It's the lead group or a participating organization. So for RAVE invitations, some of you may have, I don't know if any of you have received RAVE invitations with the transition, new RAVE invitations to studies that you didn't have before. Okay, so this is because now Access is looking across organizations, and in the past you might have been with one organization that now merged with other organizations, and so you may have received an invitation. So there's a number of things that you can do. You can either accept the invitation and just sort of ignore the study. You can decline the invitation. We don't recommend that because if you did need access in the future, it gets a little bit more difficult to get you provide you the access. You can just ignore the invitation and just leave it aside, on the side on your screen. Or your administrator or data administrator can adjust your roles. They can withdraw your roles and then reassign you your RAVE roles, but at the protocol level. So those are different ways that you can manage that. But again, that's due to the transition and the merging of some of the groups. The standard roles are pretty much the same. For RAVE, the roles are the same. For open, RAVE, CRA, read-only site investigator, open role is registrar. Triad is a new application for uploading images. It's really kind of in a pilot phase right now, so it's not really used across many of the studies. You'll probably start to hear about it more in the near future. That does have a role also, and the role is site user. But roles can be maintained from the Site Roles tab on the CTSU website. Person rules, basically they are pretty much the same. You know, you need your CTEP ID. You know, investigators need to go through the investigator process. Associates, there's the CTEP associate process for obtaining a CTEP ID. You have to re-register with CTEP annually. You need to be linked to a clinical or administrative organization. And then this last bullet is where the NCTN transition does have an impact. So your access to protocols on the CTSU website, open and RAVE, again, is controlled by the lead organization or participating organization's roster. This particularly is different for the CTSU website. In the past, maybe if you notice, if you go on the CTSU website, you were able to view more trials, whereas now you might find that the trials that you can view and have access to is more limited. And that's based on if you're not a member of a participating organization or the lead organization, you won't be able to access the protocol. So that's a new paradigm for the CTSU website. So for legacy studies, all of the trials that were active and ongoing prior to the transition of the NCTN, they were all updated with the new network group. So if it was an NSABP trial, it was updated and the new lead organization is now NRG. The protocol number and name did not change, so it would still be NSABP B55, but the lead organization will be NRG. Okay. The cover pages for the protocols will be updated over the course of the year. Right now, what CTEP had asked was that if the network groups could just submit a form so that we can make those updates in the systems, but throughout the course of the year, the groups will be submitting amendments to update their protocol cover page to reflect all of the new network groups. We have updated the protocol tab of the CTSU website to include the NCTN and all of the new network groups. So you will find all of the trials under the appropriate network group, the new group. Also, the CTSU website, each protocol will now have a funding page, and we'll talk about that more later for where we're collecting the per case management funding, and the funding page will list all of the funding available for the trial. So the studies that will be available in the NCTN, all phase 3s, all phase 2-3 trials, all phase 2 for which CTEP holds the IND, selected other phase 2 trials that CTEP approves, select AYA studies, again with CTEP approval, that's adolescent and young adult trials, and then any other network trials that CTEP approves. So again, there have been some changes to the CTSU website. The protocol screens have changed with the transition, and I'm not going to go through this this screen. I think I'll just go to the next one. So if you can see here, we have the home tab here provides you just a little synopsis of information about the trial. This funding information folder is new. This is where you'll find the per case management funding that is available for that particular trial. The LPO documents, that's, I think before it was called just documents, but that's basically where you'll find all the documents for the trial, and then the drug safety notifications. So the NCI Central Institutional Review Board. So with the NCTN, all sites will eventually be required to use NCI's CIRB. The actual time frame for when that will be required is yet to be determined, and we'll learn more about that throughout the course of the year. But basically, all institutions will have to use the CIRB unless they obtain a waiver from CTEP. The waiver process is also in development, and again, that the time frame for that will be sometime towards the end of the year. Where we'll have more information on that. But basically, in order to obtain a waiver, your institution has to show that your local IRB can approve a study within the same time frame that the CIRB can. So that will be a requirement to be able to obtain a waiver. However, coming this spring, I think it's sort of towards the end of this month or early next month, if you are participating with the CIRB now, you will not need to submit your regulatory, your IRB approvals to the CTSU regulatory office. We will be getting a data feed from the CIRB into RSS, so we will know if your site is using the CIRB, and we'll have the CIRB roster in RSS. So that will be coming sometime soon. In addition, the CTSU is also developing a site preference feature that will be available on the CTSU website, where you'll be able to record which CIRB institutions are participating in the particular trial. And that's in the phase 2 of the implementation, so I believe that's more later on in the summer. So per case management funding, this is probably one of the biggest areas that has changed with the NCTN. The NCTN will follow CTEP's per case management funding principles for cancer treatment and advanced imaging trials. And the DCP grant will provide funding for quality of life endpoints, cancer control, and cancer prevention trials. So the funding for the trial activities will fall under one of those categories: screening for intervention, base intervention, advanced imaging, biospecimen, special, which will basically be used for complex or rare disease trials, quality of life, and then the non-NCI or DCTD funding. So how will sites receive funding? The NCI per case management funds are provided to all NCTN sites participating on trials via one of the 3 funding mechanisms. So again, if you are just a main member, affiliate, and so on, your funding will come from the network group you credit with the enrollment. If you're part of a LAPS grant, your funding will come from that LAPS grantee holder, the lead LAPS organization, which is coming from NCI. And if you're a CCOP, it will come from the DCP grant. Non-NCI funding will be provided and dispersed to all, regardless of what category you're in. You will still be eligible for non-NCI funding, and that will be dispersed by the lead group. And we will not be tracking that funding, so that will be tracked by the lead group and then distributed to the sites as they meet the requirements. So NCI per case management funding will be made by the network group credited with the accrual, or the equivalent will be provided via the LAPS grant or the CCOP grant. So again, that's for the non-LAPS and non-CCOP. It's whoever you are crediting with the enrollment is who will be paying for the particular funding for the trial. And so to receive the funding for your trial, you will need to now go into open. There's an open funding screen where you'll need to go in and enter a completion date for the particular funding for the trial. We do ask that you enter the completion dates for specimens when the specimen is sent. For QOLs, you only need to enter the date once. You don't need to come back every time you complete a QOL for your patient. So. And then the DCP CCOP funding is provided by credits and is inclusive of all trial components unless otherwise noted. But there will be information about that on the funding tab on the CTSU website. So as far as collection type, when we were sort of developing this process, trying to minimize the burden for the sites as to how many times you'd have to come back and enter a date into open. But by the same token, we really only wanted to fund tests that were actually completed and done. So for the mandatory funding types, this funding is provided to all sites participating on a study, and the patient enrollment basically serves as the trigger for the funding, so you don't need to go into open and enter a date. So that would be something like the screening for intervention, your base intervention, and probably some of the special funding where it's basically your enrollment that is counting as the trigger. Then there's conditional funding types. That could be a funding that is, it's mandatory to participate on the trial, but it doesn't occur until month 6. And so the patient may not still be on the trial at month 6. So those types of specimens or funding types, you will need to go back into open and enter a date for. And then there's the truly optional funding types where, the patient does not have to agree for the particular test or evaluation. And so we need to know that whether or not the patient did have the test. And so you'll need to go into open and enter the data for that. Oops, too fast. Sorry, did I miss one? No. Okay, so this is just sort of a little quick tutorial through the open screens if you haven't already had to enter data at all. But basically what you will do is you'll go into the history tab within open, and you will enter your patient ID and click search. When your patient enrollment comes up, if you notice there is a little dollar icon next to the protocol number telling you that there is some funding associated with that particular step for that trial. So you just click on select and bring up the summary screen. And once you bring up the summary screen, there is a funding sub-tab that you can click on, which will bring up the funding for the trial. Okay, we tried to make this as simple as possible, so you didn't really need to, enter a lot of information. So it's the funding screen will be pre-populated with all of the funding that you saw on the CTSU website, and you really will only need to enter a completion date. So what you'll need to do is just enter the date. You can use the little calendar icon or enter the date. We will have the list of all of this funding. We do ask that any changes to dates are done within 7 days. We don't want any changes after that. And right now I do have to apologize. There is a little glitch in the system, is that you should be allowed to enter the enrollment date or any date the enrollment date or a date after. Right now, for some reason, it's not accepting the enrollment date, and we are in the process of fixing that. So once you enter the enrollment date, you would just click save, and you will get a confirmation that the date, that the date was entered. You can enter multiple dates at a time. So if you come in and there's multiple funding, and you come in, later on, and you can just enter all of the dates at one time, or you can come back as many times as you need to. You cannot enter future dates, so you can't come in and enter, if you plan on doing something tomorrow, enter today's date. You can't go in and enter tomorrow's date. So this is the just a screenshot of the funding tab on the CTSU website. So all of the trials that are put on the website will have a funding tab, and this is how we have listed all of the funding for the trial. Okay. And we have the amount of the funding. We'll also have a funding sheet, so all trials will have a funding sheet that will provide a little bit more details about the particular funding. In particular, if there's non-NCI DCTD funding, the funding sheet will have more information about the funding and what you need to do to be able to, get that funding. So some of the site resources continue to be the CTSU bi-monthly. We've tried to communicate as much as we can about the NCTN transition through the bi-monthly, as well as the newsletter, which comes out a couple of times a year. We do have a link for the NCTN on the CTSU website under the Education and Resources tab, so we have some more detailed information. We are also preparing a little bit more of some of the slides that you saw here about the funding and entering data into open and such. We're close to completing a sort of a funding PowerPoint, and that'll be posted on the funding tab, so that when you're in there you can get more information. And then of course there's the CTSU Help Desk. So hopefully I haven't made things more confusing, but does anyone have any questions?
Hi, thank
Hi.
you. For the funding tab, is that only effective, the per case reimbursement for new registrations after the March 3rd transition, or do we go back and enter?
No,
for
it's
older
only
patients?
moving forward, because that funding is only approved as of the new grants. So it's really for any patient that is enrolled after March 3rd, I guess, is the date. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?